In working on the sermon for today, I found it interesting that the story from John's Gospel about Jesus appearing to the apostles and saying, "Peace be with you," his giving of the Holy Spirit, his authorizing them to forgive or retain sins, has been the gospel reading appointed for the Sunday after Easter in every edition of the Book of Common Prayer since 1549. But in all the versions, from 1549 through the 1928, through and including the 1928 Book of Common Prayer, the entry stopped at the end of verse 23. It was only with the current prayer book, lectionary, first voted on in 1976 and finally authorized in 1979, that the continuation of that reading with its story about doubting Thomas was added to the appointed readings for this Sunday. And it made me wonder if doubt had been perceived as more of an issue in 1976 than it had in 1928 or 1662 or 1549. And I think that's probable. I was ordained in 1975, and my whole career in the ministry, my work in the ministry has been during a time of, I think, increased questioning and increased doubt in a way. In 1928, it would have been still quite common to see and speak of America as a Christian society. By 1976, and certainly increasing since then, saying that has become more problematic. Although I actually think that's probably a good thing. The so-called Christian society that America claimed to be, looking at it, doesn't seem to have been all that Christian, in spite of all the church going and the prayer in the schools and the other trappings of a cultural Christianity. It was when the churches began to question that culture, the Christian nature of that culture, to criticize, in some ways even to subvert the power of the political and economic elites in that culture, that those elites who had previously gravitated to the Episcopal Church started to say, "No, thank you," and to look for spiritual and moral support somewhere else, while the general population found more entertaining or restful things to do with Sunday morning. But I'm not sure that decrease then, supposedly in faith, or that decreased, at least institutional religious involvement, had much to do with doubt, or with an increase in doubt. And I'm not even sure that this passage from John has much to do with doubt either, at least as we understand the term doubt. We think of doubt as an intellectual concept, in an intellectual way, a mental way, as a kind of skepticism about some asserted information. And we also think of belief in an intellectual way, in a mental kind of way, as an acceptance of some asserted information. Maybe you believe in global climate change. Maybe you believe that there's intelligent life somewhere on some planet out in the universe. Maybe you believe that we've been catapulted into an alternate universe where the Chicago Cubs win the World Series and Exxon takes over the State Department. Or you may doubt all those things. The dictionary definition, even of belief and doubt, seem to emphasize this intellectual, mental meaning of the word. But with that understanding, issues of belief and doubt should be able to be resolved with factual proof or disproof. You wouldn't have to believe if you knew for sure. So if you had some doubt, then you'd get more information somewhere. You'd do some sort of research or some sort of experiment, or you'd ask a trusted authority. But I don't think that's what goes on, and I don't think that's what really was going on here with Jesus and the apostles, or Jesus and so-called doubting Thomas. What Thomas is asking for isn't just information, but a personal experience of the living, risen Christ. Belief and faith involve more than just assertions. Actually, the word doubt, or whatever its Greek equivalent is, doesn't occur in this passage in John. So right off the bat, the title Doubting Thomas is a kind of unfair misnomer. In Greek, what it says is, me ginu apistos arapistos. Got that, Athena?
Yeah, not bad.
Don't become unbelieving, but believing. Don't become faithless, but faithful. It's less of a chastisement and more of a recommendation. The word doubt in English is, in fact, misunderstood if it's taken to mean as the rejection of some assertion, as somehow the opposite of faith. Either you have faith or you doubt. Doubt, rather, is an uncertainty. It's a holding back of full commitment. The root word of doubt is the same root word as the root word for dual, two. So when you doubt, what it means is you have two options at least, and you're not sure. Faith doesn't necessarily imply what we think either. The root word of faith, Latin fides, is related to the root word for abide. Faith is where we abide. Faith then is where we wait when we have options to see where we're called, to see what shows forth. And the root word for believe or belief is the same root as beloved, which is clearly not something we just happen to think is true. Loving, being beloved is a part of our very being. It's the heart of our very being. So faith, belief, and doubt can be all mixed together. They're not just issues of agreement on information. They can express a sense of openness to love, openness to loving. They can speak of where it is we wait for that love while we entertain the options that arise in our lives, over which we don't have much control. We can go this way or that way. We can have a choice. And that choice, the many choices that we have increased and become more viable, I think, since 1976. And they've become more viable even by 1976. Most of us are more in the position of Thomas now than we would be in a position of people who just said yes sir and recited the creed. That's why God's called us here. More in search than in bold affirmation. See, when we think about this gospel story, and what it may have to say to us, we always have to remember that Thomas wasn't with the others when Jesus came and met them. When Jesus came and breathed the Spirit onto them and gave them peace and sent them out to forgive or retain people's sins. Thomas wasn't with them. He wasn't there to be loved, so he couldn't believe. He wasn't in the place where you had to be to wait, so he couldn't move directly to faith. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, this doubt and faith and belief with respect to Christian life. Or maybe it's a bunny and egg thing, but that ruins the analogy. Chicken and egg thing is good. Do we withhold our trust, our commitment, our openness, our love, and the vulnerability that comes with trust and openness to the commitment to love until we have a clear religious experience? Or must we be open to love, open to vulnerability, trust without reason, commit without certainty, in order to have a religious experience in the first place? Luckily for Thomas, it was a both and kind of thing, not an either or sort of thing. That's lucky for us as well. Jesus does chide, I guess, Thomas a bit when he says, don't be faithless. But he does let him touch his hands and put his hand in his side. He lets him experience what risen human life is like. He helps him know Jesus as Lord and God. So maybe it just depends on the person. Some like chicken, some like eggs. What worked for others didn't work for Thomas. What works for me may not work for you. What works for people who aren't in church this morning may be something different altogether that we need to explore and come up with. Thomas is seeking gnosis. It's a Greek word on which our word knowledge is based. And again, it's a deeper understanding than we think of as what knowledge is. On all these terms, we're pretty shallow. Gnosis is sacred knowledge, saving knowledge. It's holy wisdom. And it isn't any more than faith or belief, just a piece of missing data that we can simply acquire and then either act on or file and forget. It's a radical reorientation of the way we experience life, the way we understand the world that we live in. Gnosis, faith, belief. It has to do with a change in the context of our consciousness, not just some added content for our brain. When Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe," he's not really telling Thomas that there's anything wrong with reaching for the kind of direct experience that he was asking for. He's just saying it's not really necessary. He's saying that you can enter into belief in a number of ways. You can enter into a mutually loving relationship with God that amounts to an openness to the reality of resurrection through a kind of innocent acceptance. Acceptance without proof. And we demand proof more than they did back then. It might take some work. It might take some rethinking outside our normal materialistic boxed-in boundaries, beyond our normal religious institutionally boxed-in boundaries, outside and beyond our normal conscience assuaging, self-comforting, self-serving, cultural Christian boundaries. It may require a suspension of our usual defensive insecurities and our aversion to risk, our aversion to choosing one option or another. It seems that it does require some sort of community of like-minded people so that we can touch each other's metaphorical holes in our hands and feel each other's metaphorical wounds in a way that are ultimately healing. And it may require us to act in spite of doubt, in spite of continuing doubt. Act to choose an option, to take a chance. Jesus says that way is blessed. The French philosopher Pascal said, basically, what do you got to lose? Thanks be to God.